So it's not just a concept. It's not just like an idea of God is good and God is great and God loves us, and that's nice. But where does that land deep down in my gut? Do I believe those things, or do I just sort of live out a functional atheism in my relationships and in my life? And I believe that friendship and relationships and intimacy are at the heart of then how we actually grow deeper and deeper into the gospel. And that God has been doing this since the beginning of time to really draw us in. And so then suddenly relationships become essential to how I actually know who God is and what the gospel is. And that was just not what I was fed growing up in my evangelical church.
No.
Yeah.
No, not at all. Well, hey there, guys. This is Josh Bertram. I am your host for the Faith Roundtable, where we interview all sorts of top scholars and thinkers and writers talking about what's happening and facing the church in America today, and even broader, the church in the world. And we just try to work through some of these issues and talk about it so that you guys can take what we say here, wrestle with it on your own. Make sure you like and subscribe to all the things that hack the algorithm. Of course, I'm also the co-host of the Faithful Politics podcast. It happens right here on this channel. So make sure you're subscribing and checking that out too. And today I'm super excited to have on the program Reverend Erin F. Moniz. She has her D.Min from the Trinity School for Ministry, and she is a deacon in the Anglican Church in North America, an Associate Chaplain and Director for chapel at Baylor University, where she disciples emerging adults and journeys with them toward healthy, gospel-centered relationships. She's a trained conciliator, mediator, and conflict coach. She enjoys content creation, playing music, being outdoors, and narrating the inner monologue between her two cats, or of her two cats. And she lives in Waco, Texas with her husband, Michael. Erin, it's so great to have you on the program. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks. And good. Yeah. Congratulations on getting through that weird bio. It's like, it starts really professional and then it just gets weird, but I kind of love that. So,
hey, you know what? I really love that too. And of course, today we're talking about your latest book, Knowing and Being Known, from InterVarsity Press. And so I got to get, so our audience can kind of get a little bit more from you. I read in that bio, but what are some things that you would want to bring out that I left out in introducing you?
Oh, gosh. These sort of things are meant to make us look really impressive. But I think at the end of the day, it's the idea that I would be the last person to believe that I should be the one here talking about these things, or just being a minister generally. It's been a winding, nonlinear journey. But I did stumble into college ministry a little over a decade ago. I'd been working with youth in middle school and high school in various capacities for over 25 years, and just realized,
you put in your time.
Yeah, I just realized this is it. This is what I want to be doing. I want to just be around emerging adults and caring for them. So that's the sort of bottom line. But it's been a journey that I wouldn't have expected, because I didn't exactly take the road that people would expect ministers to go on. I just sort of found myself here, and but it's really refreshing to know that some of the things that you thought would actually disqualify you from ministry become the things that actually make you pretty good at it. So that was pretty cool.
I really love that statement, actually. I think it's so great. And you're kind of alluding to the fact, like, hey, man, I shouldn't have been the one that wrote this book, and this is like even being in ministry at all. And one of the lines that I've even heard, because I'm on subscribed to the IVP. I follow them on all the social media and everything, and I just get this reel that hits me that says, I can live without sex, but I can't live without intimacy. And I'm like, what is that? And then I realized, oh wait, I'm interviewing her. I'm going to be interviewing her. So maybe I can ask that question. What's going on with that statement? It's a shocking statement. What are you getting at from it? And how did your ministry with emerging adults help you come to that conclusion?
Yeah, no, honestly, I mean, if we're just being 100% honest, what that is clickbait. That's what that is. That is clever people who know how to grab you.
We need some clickbait.
Yes, but it is a real line from my book that actually starts out pretty early on, and it's one that I've now heard a lot of times since. But I'm referencing a person who I was at a conference years ago. And I just started into college ministry, and I heard this person from the stage say this line: "I can live without sex, but I can't live without intimacy." And it's like my brain came to a screeching halt, and it just was one of those things that I'd been kind of festering on ever since. And it was always kind of something that looped back as I entered into the occupational hazard of spending 80% of my office hours talking with my students about their intimate relationships. Is this idea of, I don't know, just sort of shocking statements like that force me to kind of, I don't know, say, are we doing this right? Are we actually helping? Am I actually helping my students with this stuff? Do I know what I'm talking about? And also reading the books they were reading, watching the pastors they were watching, just what was forming them. I wanted to know, like, what's out there, what's happening. And they would point me in all these different directions. And the pivot point for me was, I kind of suspected this canon of content wasn't exactly helping robustly with their having healthy, successful relationships. But the shift for me was when I also noticed, like, why isn't this content making them more mature Christians? And that kind of started me down a road. And the I can live without sex, but I can't live without intimacy kind of sits at the heart of this moment, where it's like, what if we talked about this differently? What if we are focusing on the wrong things? And in some cases, the statement is a bit of a giveaway, this idea that we often centralize romantic relationships as sort of this pivotal hub of who we are and what we desire and what is most important in life. And so the I can live without sex, but I can't live without intimacy begs a lot of questions. And I eventually found a lot of them I could answer in the book.
I absolutely love that. And I want to get into the questions that it begs, and we definitely will. But I did want to make a comment that, one of the reasons this resonates with me, as I'm just kind of, thinking out loud, is that we're in a culture right now where our sexual identity, the people that we're in a bedroom with, seems to have an oversized weight on who we are and how people view us, and the assumptions they make about us, conclusions they draw, narratives they write in their head. Just depending, I'm a cisgender, if people use that term, right? Or I'm a heterosexual male, and whatever it is, in these identifying markers, white, suburban, all these identifying markers, which again are very important to know and to recognize in our culture. But it seems like they have this overweight influence on how everybody views us. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. I have a bunch of questions, but just give you a chance to respond to, it's like this centralized, the person that we're in a quote unquote bed with, that becomes the most important part of who we are, when instead, I don't know, it just feels like maybe that's not the most important part of who we are. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting question, Josh, because it has like this macro level, like identity and identity politics and identity language, identity formation and tribal claims are the water we swim in, right? That is where we live. I think everybody resonates really strongly with that because part of our cultural patterns is really focused. It was funny because I think it was 2015, the New York Times did like a big article about this was the year we obsessed about identity. And I was like, 2015, who is she? What happened? Like we've been obsessing about identity, and it's just steamrolled more and more and more as we become more tribal. But at the heart of it is this focus on romantic and sexual relationships. And that's been there for a long time. So now this is just a cocktail that we're mixing together. The idea of romance, idolatry, thinking through identity, and not just identity, but like what identity has to do with, am I valuable? Do I matter? What's my worth? Am I a successful adult? So that's the thing about, relationships are hard. They're already hard. I just thank God every day that I got to do this before dating apps happened. It's crazy out here in these streets. But on top of that, it's not just navigating the logistics of just trying to find a person. Down below the surface, rumbling underneath is this, you have to get this right. This has to be successful. Everything you do, every image you put of yourself, every conversation, everything about this entire journey is also pointing to, do you matter or don't you? And so it just has this weight to it. It's just like it's so heavy because I say this a lot. It's very telling when we come across what would be maybe just general problems in our intimate relationships. Like my friends all hang out without me and I find out, or I get on the dating apps, I, put myself out there to a bunch of people and I get no responses. I get ghosted. We don't have those experiences and then try to Google or have ChatGPT help us with like how to be a better friend or how to, get myself more out there on the dating apps. That might be what we do eventually. But the first thing we do is we sit and we go, why? What does this say about me? Do they not like me? Am I doing something wrong? Like it immediately the quick leap from here's a thing that's happening in my life and relationships and what does this say about me is just lightning speed, which is why I think we in Christendom have to talk about this differently because we've really been focusing on behaviors, but I don't see a lot of content that talks about identity, particularly in how the gospel shapes that and how that influences this journey, because then we're going to have to get into things like shame and value and vulnerability and words that are just not, this is not the hub of what we're actually telling our students about relationships, which is odd to me now.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned something that got, several things, but one thing that got my ears perked up was thinking about romance idolatry. I'd love for you to go a little bit more into that, of what romance idolatry is and like how you see it right now manifesting itself.
Yeah, this is a big part of chapter 2 and 3 in the book. And I wish I'd coined the phrase. Peter Valk was the first one to really write and publish about this. And I'm indebted to him to let me sort of borrow it widely and use it prolifically. But it's this idea that at the center of what we would consider maybe a hierarchy of relationships is this central focus of romance being tied to so much that we value about ourselves and about our culture. So I write a little bit about this when I note hey, when Moana came out with Disney, she was the first Disney princess to not have a romantic storyline as a part of her character. And it's whoa, progress.
That's amazing.
There we go. Here it is. But we also still have many, many decades of Disney content that is just so Moana, while yay, Gold Star didn't fix it. We're not there yet. These shifts are kind of happening, but boy, we've been seeped in this for so long. It's formed us. It's formed our narratives, and in ways that I don't think often even think about. I write about one of my favorite examples of this is in the book, where I remember there was a small kindergarten class in this tiny little town that they would do. The kindergarten wedding was a big feature of the class every year. And they would have the little kindergarten bride and groom and everyone's the attendants. You have the little kindergarten minister. And it's just what does this say about our, where you all should be headed, which is down this aisle. And it should look like this. And it should be like this. The trick is I don't want to diminish marriage in order to, or romance or those things in order to elevate it. Because that's kind of what we've already been doing with how we've diminished unmarried people. So the reverse is not the answer, but it is, I think, just a signpost pointing to the fact that we tend to measure each other and ourselves based on romantic relationships. And this is just comes out of this romance idolatry, this idea that these are the idols that we cling to. This is the center focus. This is what we worship. This is what we do. And ultimately where we put our hope in terms of whether or not I matter.
That's really, really good. Part of this argument that you're trying to make, a lot of it will hinge right on even the definition and understanding of intimacy and what it actually is. And I would love for you to give us kind of your insight on that. What definition, what is intimacy that the kind that you're dealing with within the book, and help us understand how that can be open to other ways of fulfillment besides just those really rigid schemas that we get in our minds.
Oh yeah. Well, this was a big part of the journey for me. What is intimacy? Like, what are we looking at here? And I take some time in chapter 1 to break this down because I think it has to begin with the fact that we're not just talking about romantic relationships here, right? Like, it's my students were the first to kind of show this to me where, of course, dating and marriage and all of that stuff is really big and important. It came through my office all the time. It still does. But I was also just surprised how often I was talking to them about intimate relationships, like with their family of origin. And again, these are non-sexual, contexts. It's a really big deal for college age students to be making a transition from dependent to independent. There's a lot of questions depending on the family you were in, the level of health and toxicity. Like, I'm still having these conversations all the time. And I mean, I can read it. There's 1,000 books out there about Christian dating. I couldn't find one about this subject, but it's really important to my students. And they're coming to me with that at all. And like, the navigating of that intimate relationship and the implications it has on our other intimate relationships is huge. But like, where's the content? Who's writing about this? Similarly for friendship, for people who, we see it. People are less likely to get married these days, or they're waiting until they get older, or there's just a number of factors, widow, divorce. There's any number of reasons why we will have more and more people in our pews who are not married with young families. And it's another void in the literature of like, what is this? Is this intimate relation? Is this an intimate relationship? First of all, is friendship an intimate relationship? And if so, what does that imply for sort of dislodging romance idolatry? But yeah, intimacy sort of had to be redefined in the sense of this broader sense of there's all these types of intimate relationships we have, particularly in these 3 areas of family, friendship, and romance.
Yeah. Well, that makes a lot of sense because we get, just like anything, we get a very narrow view of what it is based on like a few different scenarios or ideas that we have in our mind. Like, again, intimate relationships. Well, what does that mean? Well, that just means people that are dating or people that are in, they're married. Basically, that's basically it. Like, it has to be romantic. That's the only way that intimacy is, that's the only context that intimacy really occurs, which obviously isn't true. Yeah. And when I can see like when we want people, especially to practice some kind of like, sexual ethic, but then we're telling them the only way you can be intimate with someone, something that they desperately need, is to be sexually active with them. We're essentially saying, hey, you can't get what you need, but this is like essential for life, right? Essential for a flourishing life. Yeah. Is these intimate relationships, and you can't get what you... Go ahead.
It's particularly burdensome for men. This is a whole other branch off of this tree, but what we have done to men is we have limited their needs for intimacy down to something very carnal.
Yes.
Particularly in relationships with men and women, this has become really charged because women have a little bit more license to have friendships that put currency into that intimacy bank, right? And for men, there's all these landmines. I find it interesting that back when C.S. Lewis wrote The Four Loves, he spent a large portion of his chapter on friendship talking about male relationships and homophobia. And
that is interesting.
How it's just this tricky thing where it creates these barriers. So for most men, looking for intimacy, feeling like, I need this, but also this is how I categorize myself as a full functioning adult. So on one extreme, you have things like the incel movement that are deeply tied to this cultural narrative. And then on the other side, you have people in healthy marriages, but for whom all of the weight of everything that they need, all that currency going into their bank, has to come from this one person. And it really puts a strain even on really good marriages. And so, I think for men, this is particularly fraught and is another thing that needs to be, I think, talked about more and looked at more in Christendom. But that's just me.
Yeah, well, I absolutely agree. One of the things you do right in the book is that you're trying to show that we really don't have like that much better of like Christians, meaning Christians, don't have that much better statistics in terms of our behavior, in terms of the culture on divorce, on abuse, on issues that people are looking at. And they're like, man, what's going on here? What's the connection here with this intimacy deficit that you're seeing? Like, what have you found is kind of causing this in the church? What, I guess even your best understanding of why isn't the church any better?
Yeah, no,
than the culture. That seems like that's
yeah. No, I really break this down in chapter 3 because it's kind of this idea that we would assume that I think the church would largely say, like, we're creating a counter narrative, right? We're creating sort of a counter to what is being sold at us by this very secular, sexually driven, world. And it's just like, we're not, we're really not. If anything, the picture is actually a mirror. It's not something different. It's just a reflection ultimately. And if I had to just boil down to one of the biggest underlying factors, I think it's that somewhere along the way, we unmoored our discipleship on these topics, the way we talk about them and think about them. We've unmoored it from the gospel and the centrality of the gospel. So that's going back to why this isn't making my students more mature Christians, because even the ones that are like super gung-ho about Jesus and like want their whole lives to reflect this faithfulness that is so important to them, they're trying to navigate this stuff in real time, but none of it has anything to do with the fundamentals of their faith. Now, it might contain good advice. It might contain, different things for them to think about and, try to navigate, and maybe good behaviors, steer them towards, good choices some of the time, but it has nothing to do with their faith. And it really is more of a baptism of certain ideas that says Jesus wants you to do this. But my research showed that actually, depending on whose book you buy, Jesus wants you to not kiss before you get married. Jesus doesn't care if you kiss before you get married. It becomes this sonic mud of information that my students were really attuned to, and they're just like, we just don't know. We don't know. Do we kiss dating goodbye? Like, we don't know. Like, well, what are we supposed, who's right here? What are we supposed to do? And so it's just so disconnected from anything fundamental to what actually drives us towards flourishing. And so what we have just doesn't.
Yeah. So is this kind of the most common lament that you hear from students, or is there more? Like, what are the common complaints that you're hearing? Like, one of them that you just said was that there's just this really widespread misunderstanding about any standards for what dating, any standards of conduct. I mean, is that kind of the issue? Like, what are the issues that students are bringing up to you when it comes to healthy relationships that they want to see modeled, but they aren't?
Yeah. Well, some of the things that they bring sort of incidentally are the same questions I've been getting for, decades, where I'm like, really, we're still okay. So here's a question that's coming back through the door again. And are we no further along on some of these subjects, which is just like, how far is too far? How does God feel about me sleeping with my girlfriend? Should I date this friend? Should we try, like side hugs, the whole business. We're not really out of purity culture, even though we've tried to tell ourselves we are, but it's really just a 2.0 version that's being sold in similar ways. But when I did my research, I got to ask really pointed questions of students, and when they were confronted with that and began to think about it, their answers were really enlightening about things like, oh yeah, there's just all this difference, and we don't know who to listen to. I had students of color who were like, we just stopped reading these books and listen because none of it applies to us. Coming from a Hispanic culture, coming from Black culture, a lot of this content doesn't actually apply because it's coming from cultural dominant sources that don't speak to what I'm going through. So there was all these different things that came up that was just so fascinating to me as I was doing these interviews. But until I asked the question, I don't think any of my students would have raised that on their own. They're sort of coming out through the conversations. And so it's interesting. I love putting a lot of that back into the book, as you can sort of read from their perspective in chapters 3 and 4, sort of the perspective and what's driving them about how they think about Christendom and relationships. But at the end of the day, it's really the questions under the questions, which is the fact that, like it or not, we are doing theology in our relationships. We're trying to figure out who God is. We're trying to figure out where God fits into all of this. I talk about this phantom variable where we're like, is God going to give me a husband or a wife? Like, is that part of the deal?
Right.
If I'm faithful and single, like what we as ministers, we pull out these spiritual prescription pads and we're just like, if you just work on yourself, find contentment, whatever. Like just, we have this formula because we expect God to do something and we may not know exactly what, but we also want to be like, it's not just all up to us in whatever circumstances we're given. God has a place in all of this, but what is that place? And what does that look like when things don't work out the way I thought they were supposed to? And I think in many ways too, when we are in relationships with people, a lot of what we are sussing out as we think about identity and all of these things is directly connected to how we think about God and how God works in the world and God's economy and where God is. And so that's a lot what I hit in the middle chapters in part 2 is just breaking down this idea that does our faith really have anything to do with how we think about intimate relationships? Or is it really just an ethical byline? Is that it? And if so, do we really need the faith? Can we just take the ethics and toss everything else and be good people who don't hurt each other or cheat on each other or, follow good rules? And I make the case that faith is actually really important, just not in the way that we thought, because at the end of the day, a lot of what's happening underneath the surface has to do with what I think about myself. And incidentally, that's tied actually to what I believe really, truly about.
Relationships are the hardest thing to navigate. Marriage relationships are very difficult. I kind of felt like I did get this sense of like my spouse was supposed to be someone that was probably like way more burden and way more like weight than they could ever supposed to take from me. Like the sense that they were supposed to take everything, they were supposed to absorb, all the issues, take them, listen, be there. And of course, that's part of marriage is being there for each other, obviously, and being there in the issues that the other person has, and listening and caring and helping and being a partner and all of that. But like there's this thing about marriage that is supposed to meet all your needs, relational needs. Right. I just thinking about my parents and my parents' generation, like many of them had friends, but a lot of ministers that I knew didn't have a lot of friends, and their wife was their only friend essentially. But that's not good. Or like their husband was their only friend. Yeah. And it's like, that seems like that's a real recipe for like unhappiness and discontentment, is putting all of that on one person. Yeah. Right. And so when I'm thinking about like God hardwiring us to be known and knowing and being known, right? Like your book is saying, the title, that we're supposed to have this intimacy. How do we look at the Bible and see God? Like, what's the right biblical view of this, I guess, that you were looking and you were finding, like, what does the Bible say about us in being known and knowing, and the faceted nature of that?
Yeah. Well, you touch on several things there. In one sense, I make the case that one of the greatest casualties of romance idolatry is the death of friendship, which culturally, we're actually making a shift on this. We're starting to, there are friendship coaches now, that this is like a profession, like life coaches, but we're shifting, right? Friendship coaches, friendship experts. They're like touring and, giving all these TED Talks. We're starting to see Gen Z is asking for less sex in television and movie content, those sort of things. And so like some of the culture shifts are starting to happen there. But again, we've been steeped in this for a long time. So it's a start, but we're still not quite there, because in our media, largely friendship is a relegated role. It's the supporting character to the main plot line, which is your romantic development. And in many ways, this has also just affected all of our other relationships. I make the case that if you're going to create a hierarchy of types of intimacy, friendship is the one at the middle. And I make an appeal in my last 2 chapters, particularly to ministers and local churches, like, if you want healthy marriages, maybe instead of doing marriage retreats, which do some marriage retreats, that's not a bad thing at all, but maybe focus your content more on the art of friendship, especially the art of adult friendship, because people who are not married will benefit from that. People who are emerging adults coming up in the world will benefit from that. We will date differently. Our marriages will be healthier. It's a tide that raises all ships, and it doesn't exclude anyone. And it's actually going to, help us be a better community of people. So like at the end of the day, I'm just like, this is a real missed opportunity because romance idolatry has got us like, it's you and me, babe, we're trying to get the world. It's just two of us and we've got each other and you completely. And even if we find that sort of dismissive and sappy, we still operate that way. We have this idolatry of the nuclear family, which is a cousin to romance idolatry, that sort of says family first, and this is what it's all about. But that isolation actually breeds more dysfunctional family systems than it does healthy family systems. Because anything that's insular without any sort of outside input will begin to distort its own vision of itself. And that's the thing, is like, we don't need theology to tell us this. These family systems theory and just like behavioral sciences and places like the D.Min Institute that have been studying this stuff for a long time tell us the healthiest marriages are those that have worked on the friendship within the marriage and have friendship that is outside of the marriage supporting it and raising it up. The data supports it. It's just, it's there already. So when it comes to the theology, I think what's interesting about this is that these three intimacy motifs that my students sort of have identified in how they approach things are actually the three that show up in scripture that are the key ways that God is communicating God's self to God's people. And it starts in Exodus. First time, we've been talking about God as the I am, the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, it's all these monikers. And then for the first time, as Moses is, kind of going back and forth with Pharaoh, Yahweh says, tell them, these are my children. And there it is for the first time, is intimacy language infused in, where we have a parental relationship between a God and human beings. And this is kind of a big deal. I mean, in the ancient world, this is not done. I mean, Aristotle really gets mad about some of this stuff in his writing. He's like, God and people are not friends. Like, these are othered beings. This doesn't happen. And it's just, it's a big contentious thing, but then all throughout scripture, it begins to ramp up more and more. And we see the marriage motif oftentimes used in like hey, you guys are cheating on me. Don't do it. Like it's,
right.
But then all the way to Ephesians, where Paul's like, these are great mysteries and I'm talking about God and,
yes.
There's something bigger here. And then of course in John, I think 15, you have Jesus saying, you're not servants, you're my friends. And so we have these three motifs that God is using and creates these things, created marriage, created friendship, created the family unit, and then utilizes those as these pathways to understanding something transcendent, but that is actually ultimately this embodied thing. So it's not just a concept. It's not just like an idea of God is good and God is great and God loves us, and that's nice. But where does that land deep down in my gut? Do I believe those things, or do I just sort of live out a functional atheism in my relationships and in my life? And I believe that friendship and relationships and intimacy are at the heart of then how we actually grow deeper and deeper into the gospel, and that God has been doing this since the beginning of time to really draw us in. And so then suddenly relationships become essential to how I actually know who God is and what the gospel is. And that was just not what I was fed growing up in my evangelical church.
No.
Yeah.
No, not at all. And I want to make sure I understand. So when you trace intimacy through the Bible, you have these motifs, mm-hmm. right? Obviously, you have relationships with marriage, relationships with family, but you have this relationship with friendship, and you have like these, this almost strangeness that the Hebrew Bible and then the New Testament following it would have this idea that we could be this intimate with God or with a God.
Yeah.
Right? And then now we have Jesus saying that we're friends. So you have like different, but then Paul saying, and Jesus using like, I go to prepare a room for you. It's marriage kind of language. Mm-hmm. Jesus using, parables about a wedding, the mm-hmm. groom is here and, he's going away, but he'll be back. And so that's then carried in, and we have this idea of God as Father. We have this idea of God as husband. We have this idea of God as friend. And we have like this really multifaceted view of how we have intimacy with God, even using these metaphors and analogies from our own life mm-hmm. to understand that. And so that's kind of instructive of, hey, we're not just going to be able to get everything we need from dad or mom or Susie or brother or sister or mm-hmm. wife or husband or friend, but we need all to come together. Is that kind of
Yeah, and
correct?
That's correct, but it's also just one layer. What I found interesting is that it's like there's a starting point where it's like, oh, God is Father, and I have a father. And so I have an understanding of what God is saying because I have this earthly father. It's more like, oh, God is using allegory in that sense. And it's not that God's not doing that. It's not that there isn't like some parallel meaning that God says, yeah, bride and bridegroom. Okay, these are concepts that have this accessibility for us on a horizontal level as human beings. But it wasn't just that, and then this idea, this multifaceted Trinitarian God, the fact that these three motifs are being utilized and showing us these three levels of intimacy that we're engaging with and that we need in our lives. But I think what we're really drilled down on, and this is, I think it's chapter 7, where I talk about the location of God. The indwelling of the Holy Spirit, really, that's a sticking point in all of this, because if that's a real intimate thing, almost like an icky intimate thing, where it's like, so now God's inside me and inside you. And Christians, we make these claims all the time. We're just like throwing them around, but this is weird, right? Like this is kind of a weird thing that we're talking about, that God is in me and God is in you. And it's also
it's kind of weird language that needs some definition.
Yeah. And it's also this thing where like, if we go too deep into it, it's like, but you're not God and I'm not God. And also we both kind of suck. Like this is people are the worst, right? Like, so it's just like, God, really, like, what are you doing? What is this whole thing? But I find it really wild, this idea that God would say, yeah, I am everywhere. You can find me anywhere. You can find me in any way, shape, or form. But if you want to find where I have like definitively located myself, it's these folks. I think Flannery O'Connor's essay, Revelation, has like just sort of a striking way of thinking about this sort of the dirty, filthy people that we stay away from are these vessels of redemption and salvation. So again, a thing that we maybe probably need to disciple more and pastor on more in our churches, but we have these baptismal vows and things that we talk about, these concepts of we're being the family of God, we're like a body, it's this organic language, and there's just real like intimate connectivity that's involved. But at the end of the day, I don't think anyone ever told me like, you're really going to learn about God and you're really going to encounter God in a powerful way through intimate relationships with other people. And that's going to be a place where some sort of weird alchemy will happen, where these people that, they're messy and they kind of suck and you kind of suck. And these are just lumps of lead, and yet somehow God is turning it into gold. And I can't quite qualify that except to say that it happens, and God chose to put himself with people, and now it's unavoidable. Now you can't do Christianity on your own. There's a lot of things you can do on your own, but you can't do Christianity on your own. You can have moments of solitude. You can have moments where you're enhancing that time with the Lord, but you cannot you have no use or ideas for your spiritual gifts. You have no fight. Like, there's so much about your Christian life that requires people. But I think we've done that at sort of arm's length in a lot of ways, and it's a little scary to put this sort of theological idea on the fact that these people are so deeply important to me actually having a very robust and embodied relationship with God. And that's what the book just sort of kind of pushes to the front, but I think it'll need more development. I think we'll need a few more people to speak into that.
Yeah, but I'm so happy that you're bringing this out, talking about it, continuing this conversation, because it's so important that we not only have a better view of intimacy, because, we need to be able to offer people something that's true, but that we're actually practicing, right? So you can have deep friendships. And I did experience deep friendships that gave me really everything I needed when I was single, honestly. I knew I wanted to be married. I knew I wanted to find the right person, right? And I get it that's an aspiration and it's a good one. That's from God, right?
Yeah.
In so many ways. But it's like, I had friends that really helped me in terms of like actual companionship. Like it's almost like I was almost like set up for even more success because I had so many people around me all the time, like in college. And it's like, then you go and you got nobody around you. And I feel like that's one of the things is like you go from living with people to not, just to having no one if you're living by yourself. And that is hard. That isolation is not good.
I think it's a big deal for so many people.
It's a huge deal.
It's a whiplash of expectations. Yeah.
And one thing that it's just this question that keeps digging in my mind, right? It's that itch at the back end. We're talking about purity culture, right? And I've heard a lot about purity culture and a lot of negativity about purity culture. And I don't doubt the negativity about it. But I would love for you, like from your point of view, where you sit, what's wrong with purity culture? Like what needs to be taken away from it and what should replace? Like what should be removed and then added, I guess. How should it be reformed, if it should be reformed at all? If it's not purity culture, what should it be? And I know that's kind of part of what you're doing here in this book, is trying to bring out a better way forward. So what was wrong with purity culture and how do we replace it with the right things? Does that question make sense?
Yeah. And in some ways I want to recognize that purity culture is not a homogenous thing in the sense that everybody's experiences with different aspects of it. It's a framework. Right. It's a framework in which we filled that with different things. So depending on who was leading or teaching, like I grew up in a church that was really into courtship. Like courtship was like what you did, but like other people didn't experience that so much as it was just a lot of information about like gender roles and behaviors and modesty. And those are often like big themes that came out of purity culture. But the thing is, purity culture also started because we did really want people to actually have healthy relationships. Like the intention behind a lot of what was driving, like you can't just demonize everybody who got sold on it. You can't just demonize everyone who taught it or wrote about it or attempted it. I mean, there were some bad people for sure, but generally speaking, I think like my youth ministers really wanted to see us flourish. They wanted to see us follow Jesus, but it's a framework that you don't actually need if you have the gospel. And that's the thing. I think in some ways it just distracted from what was actually at the heart. The problem with purity culture in a nutshell is it's not a robust theology of intimacy, but scripture actually has a robust theology of intimacy, starting kind of in that Exodus passage and kind of like moving through the story of God. It's everywhere. And it is not just proof texts about behaviors. Not that behaviors aren't important. They're super important. We don't want to be terrible people in our relationships. Behaviors are very much important, but you can't start there. And that was a lot of what purity culture did, is it was a framework that started with behaviors and they just didn't stick because there was nothing driving what we know about forming habits and actually doing good things. If it's just about knowing the good things to do, you don't actually need your church to teach you that. Social scientists have been studying this for a long time. It's a massive area of research. It's been reviewed and peer reviewed. We know what it takes to have healthy relationships. We have a formula. We have definitive markers. I do a little subset of this in my book. It's this is it. These are the things. You do these things, you have healthy intimacy, period. We've studied it. It's the way. But we don't just do that. We get in our own way. And this is where the gospel comes in, I think, because if I just was, reciprocity, trust building, communication, mutuality, attention, all of these things. But I love my husband and we've been together for almost 20 years and I still am a jerk sometimes. Why would I do that? Why would this person I love so much? And I think this is when we get down into there's something working underneath the surface that the Bible gives us a narrative for. So my chapter on deceit, sin, fear, and shame just kind of names it. Our self-sabotage, why we can be really crappy friends to other people, why we struggle with our families, why we're not great spouses or in dating. It's right. We have to reckon with that. And so what purity culture doesn't do, I think, because it's trying to actually take up space where the gospel should be the focus, is that the gospel comes back and says, you are trying to have this relationship tell you who you are. But I've got good news. I already tell you who you are. You're free. You're full. You're beloved. You're adopted. You lack nothing for life and godliness. You come full to this space. The scarcity's a lie. It's not real. This isn't actually who you are. But when I show up full to my relationships, I'm a different person. When I remember for half a second what the gospel says is already true about me because of the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, I actually don't need anything from you. I can just love you. It's a game changer.
Yes.
And so purity culture just isn't on the same planet, but it was an unnecessary framework that actually distracted from what was always there. This isn't, what's in my book isn't new. I didn't discover something new. We just got distracted by other narratives, forgetting that what was there all along was what was actually going to be everything we needed to then answer the questions we have about side hugs and dating apps and things like that.
I think you're hitting on something so important right now. And I hope that our listeners are taking this in because, so many of us are wondering what the key to fulfillment in our life is. And it's like, well, it's relationships, Yeah. It's the relationships that we have being operating on, as healthy as they can on all, as many cylinders as they can, right? And that we're constantly doing, maintenance, trying to get things better. Why? Because life is not supposed to be lived alone. It's much better in community. It's much better with people that you care about. So why be alone? There's really no point to doing that. And so it's just so important for people even to have permission. Like, hey, you need to go have friends. It's okay to have friends. It's okay to go hang out. It's okay to not be alone and be isolated. That's like 101, right? Of just like happiness and fulfillment. Don't be isolated because then you will be unhappy because you're not getting what you need in terms of relational fuel and all of those things. If our listeners were to pick one habit this week that you think would be, hey, this is like a really great thing to do to increase intimacy, not in their marriage, right, but in life, what would that habit be? What would you recommend for them?
That's a good question. Honestly, the first thing that came to my mind is therapy.
Get some therapy.
Well, here's the thing. I think
read the book,
buy my book, right? No, but no, it's this idea, or maybe a spiritual director. This might even be the ticket because some therapists are wonderful and talented and great, and others less so. But if I'm going to aim at habits like attention or trust building or communication, some of that really starts with me getting to understand what's going on with me, how I get in my own way, the things that have formed me. This is like the approach to conflict that Jesus gives us in the Sermon on the Mount. It's like, yeah, there's going to be a speck in your brother's eye that you're going to need to see clearly to remove. It's got to be removed. It's there. It's an issue, but you have a log in your own. So you have to start with yourself, self-reflection, like the ability to actually have some intuition, which I think is really important. I'm a person that doesn't do that naturally. I don't have a lot of self-intuition. I struggle with empathy. I don't have like a natural mechanism to put myself in other people's shoes and maybe hear my words, how they hear them and things like that. These are things that it's a bit of a liability as a minister. I've worked really hard along the years and have a talented therapist for whom I'm trying to do that work so that I can do the practices that engender healthy relationships. And that's a great habit to start with. But I would say that with a caveat, because at the end of the day, what that therapist is not going to be able to do, what that spiritual director is not, I think, ultimately going to be able to fix or cure in me is the fact that beneath the habits that I'm moving towards and trying to reflect on and build in my life is this need to also really dive deep into the subterranean levels of the gospel. And that actually happens, ironically, in your intimate relationships. It is both the ends and the means. So it's like, I want to get healthy so I can have healthy relationships, but also how do I actually drink deeply of the gospel on a regular basis to have this sanctifying process that is actually pulling me back again and again and again to something that is true about who I am. Relationships, actually. Quiet times, sure, those are good. They fill in, but it just doesn't have the weight of another person in your life who actually knows what a loser you are, what a jerk you can be, but looks at you and says, this is not who you are. Come back.
So
come
good.
back, right? Come back. I know you. I get you don't need this. This is a lie. Come back. There is something so powerful, which is why I believe that scripture is pointing us over and over, and why we're hardwired for intimacy, where God's like, no one's getting out alive on this. You're going to crave this till the day you die, because that is where you will find me. So I've always got that internal hunger in you, because I won't let you be comfortable with isolation. And it's just,
I really like that, because it's absolutely true. And the way that we kind of grew up, in church, if you're going to church, right, in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, It was kind of like, and probably after, right? But
Yeah.
I'm just talking about growing up. It was you gotta read your Bible. It's all these disciplines that you do by yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Everything's by yourself, and that's what makes you a good Christian. Is
Yeah.
just doing these things by yourself with no one else.
Well,
and
we're
not having to
that's
do
the
anything else.
The American Western. We're autonomous.
It
We're
is.
John
It
Wayne's,
is.
Ralph Waldo Emerson's self-reliance. Like
Yes.
it makes sense that our Western version of Christianity reflects a lot of those values.
Absolutely, it does, and it's like it makes so much sense. Like, hey guys, like it's not a secret. Like, I know you think that like super Christians need to memorize the whole Bible, but no one's really doing that. And actually, the people that did that in the past, Jesus actually had the hardest words to speak to them.
Yeah, some of them were just really awful people. Yeah.
They were awful people, but they had the whole Bible memorized. Now, dude, whole Bible memorized, bro, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I would never discourage someone, but what I would do is say, if you're doing that at the expense of connecting with people, at the expense of talking about what's going on in your life and just trying to grow in community, then you're missing something key. And that is huge. You cannot just be discipled without another person who's really talking to you and really connecting with you on a deeper level than surface, right? We have to get to the deeper levels than the surface that we typically stick to.
Yeah.
And even the theological surface where we talk about really deep ideas, again, that's great, but we keep it separate from us.
Yeah.
We just talk about how awesome David was or how this Hebrew word and that, and those are great, but we keep them separate from us. We don't want to see ourselves in David. We don't want to really answer those questions or even ask them.
Yeah.
And so
it means our relationships and how we function in them will have to change. This has been a big challenge for me because in writing the book, I realized like my primary purpose in my marriage and in my friendships and with my family is to be someone who is either very explicitly or in a lifestyle of latent like messages to be able to help bring them back to the truth about God and themselves, to be able to, and I mean, sometimes that means you look at somebody and you say it and you say, hey, this is not who you are. Remember who you are. Remember who God is. Remember these promises. And then there are times when it just needs to be the way that we care for people that makes it hard for them to believe that they are unloved and that nobody can love them and God doesn't love them, right? Like there's so many ways to do this, but I take these things for granted. I don't get up every day saying, how am I going to do that with my husband today? How am I going to do that with my friends today? How am I going to do that for my colleagues today? And I myself am trying to get into the practice of being more intentional about, no, this is what this is for. This is the purpose of intimacy is actually to draw me 1,000 times back to the gospel, to lure me out of my spiritual amnesia where I believe lies of scarcity and disconnection and abandonment that are just not true. And so my book sort of creates a primer, but it's not really a how book. I get some flack for this. They're like, Erin, just tell us what to do. And I'm like, sorry, it's more of a why and what book, but we need more. We need the how. We need books on the art of adult friendship. We need books on how to do this well in our marriages. We need books, or just content generally. Not everyone reads books these days, but like, we need more content on how to actually reframe how we exist in these relationships so that they actually are doing that gospel work of remembrance. So I'm trying to do that for myself, but it's a required shift.
Yeah, I totally hear that. And I really appreciate the work that you've done to put this together. I appreciate the study, the research, bringing this out for people to think about, wonder about. I mean, this is such an important topic. Thank you for writing the book and doing this work. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm again, I never thought I would be the one doing this, but this all changed my life. And so I want to get into as many hands as possible because I really do think it can change lives. So
No, I agree. And I would say the same thing. And how can people, is there like a preferred vendor that you would have them go to? And then what else do you have? Like, how can they connect with you? What do you have working on? Like, are you doing a tour with this, or kind of what's your project surrounding this?
Yeah, my books are kind of wherever books are sold. I like to point people to their local bookshops. You can request books at your library. I don't know if people know that anymore. I love the community aspect of that. But I mean, you can just go on, the big box jungle site and buy my book as well. But I have a website. It's so, sorry. It's like there's this hubris that like I throw up a little bit in the back of my mouth when I be like, I have a website. It's my name.
I understand.
It's erinfmoniz.com. But like, that's where all my stuff is. If you want to book me to speak, I love speaking. I love actually being with people and getting to hear their stories and connect with them. And have that opportunity. But where I'm going to be speaking and some of that's already on the calendar, all of that's on my website. And you can just even learn more about just other content that I've done or put together. I want my emerging adults to have good content. So that's a lot of what I do. And this book is just kind of the latest.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Erin, for jumping on, spending some time with us today. It's been like a super enlightening conversation.
Yeah, it's been fun. Thanks for having me, Josh.
Absolutely. And to our viewers, guys, thanks for joining for another episode of the Faith Roundtable. Again, like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, do the things that hack the algorithm so we can get this great content out to you, because we try to get you really great content so you can share it, think about it, talk about it, splice it up, whatever you want so that it makes a difference to you. Appreciate you guys. Make sure you're tuning in to the Faithful Politics as well. And we'll see you guys next time. Thanks.